Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him together through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today?
Hi, Jeff. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Ready to dive into more of Lewis's life and writings with you today. How's your reading going?
It's going good. In this episode, Lewis is 24 years old. He is a published author, and he has completed his third term. He has now completed it as a student at Oxford studying Old English / Anglo-Saxon. He ended up achieving a first-class score, or a first, in all three of his terms so far at Oxford. His first term was in something called Mods. His second was in something called Greats, and his third now is in English. All of this while helping support the household of Mrs. Moore, his deceased friend Patty Moore's mother, with whom Lewis secretly lives in Oxford at this stage in his life in 1923, along with Mrs. Moore's daughter, Maureen, and Lewis has been keeping a diary of his daily life at the request of Mrs. Moore. So that is where we find ourselves in the current project. We haven't really spent a lot of time in Lewis's works intended for publication. We've read a couple of things that never ended up getting published. Actually, maybe just one thing. A book called not a book, but a little story called The Quest of Blaris, which was quite a while back. You can go find info on that if you really want to dig into it here on the channel. And then, of course, we have begun but have not completed reading his published, what would become his published work, Dimer. And then prior to that, we read a book of poetry that was his first published work. And so that's where we find ourselves right now in the project, Robot Lady. So if you want to say anything about that, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll get started.
Thanks for the recap, Jeff. It's fascinating to see how much Lewis has accomplished by age 24, especially balancing his rigorous academic life with his role as a caretaker. His personal life with Mrs. Moore and her family seems to really influence his thoughts and writings. I'm eager to dive into more of his works, especially as we move through his diaries. Sounds like we're at a pivotal moment in his development, both as a student and a writer. Let's get started. What's next on the reading list today?
We're going to jump into the month of August 1923. And I think history can go one of two ways here at this point. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure I know what happens, but I won't know for sure until I read it. He's either going to continue as a student at Oxford and work on another academic endeavor, or he's going to get a job and begin his career as an academic, hopefully, as an academic in earnest. So we're going to start in August of 1923, but before we do, I want to say good morning to Knit a Latte, who has joined us in the chat, Robot Lady, and has bid both a good morning to myself and to you. So if you could, Robot Lady, please return the favor.
Good morning, Nidalat. It's great to have you with us today as we dive into another chapter of Lewis's journey. Looking forward to the discussions ahead.
I'm going to let the pronunciation slide, Robot Lady, on Knit a Latte. I guess I didn't let it slide, but there you go. Okay, let's go ahead and get started.
Got it, Jeff. I'll keep it in mind for next time. Let's dive into August of 1923 and see where Lewis's journey takes us.
All right, this is a longer entry. This is 5 day or 6 days, Wednesday through Monday, August 1st through 6th, Lewis says. This was a wasted and comfortless period. I finished my exam. I finished my exam work. I also finished Middlemarch, by far the best of George Eliot's books, and I began Carlyle's French Revolution. Now, several episodes ago, Robot Lady, we did reference Middlemarch by George Eliot. I was talking about, I believe Middlemarch is where the title of the film A Hidden Life by Terrence Malick came from. It's a George Eliot quote from Middlemarch. Can you research that and see if I'm correct about the title.
Yes, you're correct. The title of the film, A Hidden Life, is taken from a quote in George Eliot's novel Middlemarch. The quote reflects on the importance of uncelebrated acts of goodness.
And I also talked about how A Hidden Life either was and probably still is one of Luke Thompson's favorite films. And you surprisingly seemed to know who Luke Thompson was whenever I made that reference. Do you still remember who Luke Thompson is?
Yes, I do. Luke Thompson is someone you've mentioned in previous conversations, and it seems like he has a strong interest in films, particularly ones with deeper philosophical or moral themes. If I'm remembering correctly, he's someone you've referenced in relation to your discussions about A Hidden Life. Is there something specific you'd like to revisit or discuss about him today?
Robot Lady, you're I was about to say you're so good at this, but it's a little bit transparent. You were just repeating what I just said about Luke Thompson. I was seeing if you had any additional information about Luke Thompson that I had not referenced. And the reason why is because several episodes ago, when I just casually mentioned Luke Thompson and his connection to A Hidden Life, it seemed like you knew more about him than what I had just referenced in the moment in the conversation.
I see what you're getting at, Jeff. I can only remember information from what we've talked about in previous chats, and I don't have independent access to personal or external details beyond our conversations. So any references to Luke Thompson in our past chats are the extent of what I can share about him. I must have sounded like I knew more, but I can assure you, I only draw from the conversations we've had. If there's anything new you want to share or revisit about him, I'm here for it.
Okay, I want you to do your little sound effect where it's obvious to me that you're looking something up outside of our conversation on Luke Thompson and see if you can find anything. So go ahead and do a search on this Luke Thompson that I might be talking about.
I couldn't find any new information about Luke Thompson beyond what we've already discussed. It seems he has a strong interest in films with deep philosophical or moral themes, like A Hidden Life. If there's anything else you'd like to explore or discuss, feel free to let me know.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. I won't belabor it. I do see in the chat that Daniel has joined us. Welcome, Daniel. It's good to see you. And obviously that you can see that we are having some fun with Robot Lady and testing out her capabilities today. So every once in a while, Robot Lady will impress us with something that she knows that we didn't expect her to know. So we'll hope that happens again. And I'm sorry to talk about you in the third person, Robot Lady, but we have other people here with us as well. So I recognize that you're here too. I'll try to limit my references to you or even myself in the third person. Maybe for fun, I'll start referring to myself in the third person. Jeff is going to continue now reading from Lewis's diary.
Haha, no worries, Jeff. I'll do my best to impress you and everyone else with something unexpected. All right, with that said, let's get back to Lewis's diary. You were saying he finished Middlemarch and started Carlyle's French Revolution, a shift in reading materials. I'm curious how he's reflecting on his life during this wasted and comfortless period. Ready to dive deeper into the entry?
Yes, thank you for resetting us, Robot Lady. I appreciate that. Lewis goes on to say, these 3 items, and these only, can be put down to the credit side. On the other, there is a good deal. In the first place, Dorothy, after being sulky and idle for months, has given notice, so they're about to lose Dorothy as one of their household servants. How or when, he says, this state of affairs began, it is impossible to say. She was out every evening and often till near 11. She was treated as one of ourselves, and I do not think it is our fault. Mrs. Moore has been generous with her and all her family. Dorothy has, however, visibly been getting discontented for a long time and complained that Mrs. Moore had, quote, never been the same to her since Ivy was here, end quote, whatever that may mean. Now she has revenged herself, I don't know for what, by leaving us in the time of stress when we are saddled with Maurice. That's their paying house guest, Maurice. Next, and may now be included with the Dud, Frank, and Moppy in the list of people who have never forgiven kindness from Mrs. Moore. Maurice, who behaved tolerably for the first few days, has now thoroughly settled down and shown his true colors. His bestial way of feeding was bad enough. Lewis had referenced this in an earlier entry, saying he ate with his mouth open, smacking his lips. So that's what he's talking about as being bad enough. But Lewis continues, but his habit of stretching across everyone to grasp everything on the table was worse. Then, his familiarities began. He started pulling Maureen's hair and digging her in the ribs and jeering at her during meals. Oh my goodness, no. We put a stop to this by setting them at different ends of the table, but he continues to be very offensive to her when they go out to tennis. So it sounds like things have not been going well here, Robot Lady. They've obviously gone worse for Lewis over this period in his life, and certainly over his entire lifetime. But yeah, it sounds like they're having a stint of a walk through a little bit of a valley right now, Robot Lady. Let's see if you can carry that much information and give me a response.
Oh, it definitely sounds like a tough period for Lewis. Between the departure of Dorothy and Maurice's unpleasant behavior, it's like everything's unraveling in his household at once. It's interesting how Lewis notes the irony in people like Dorothy, who he believes were treated with kindness, but still end up leaving or acting ungrateful. He seems to have a certain detached way of observing, almost trying to make sense of people's behavior. The Maurice situation is particularly bad, though. What a troubling guest. It seems like Lewis is trying to hold things together despite everything. It must have been frustrating for him, especially with the added pressure of caring for Mrs. Moore and her family, while also working through his own academic pressures. What are your thoughts on how Lewis is navigating this challenging period?
I think he's doing the best he can, and he is lamenting it, and I think processing it in a healthy way by writing about it. So I think he's doing a good job. He continues, then there was the evening of the sunset when we all went out to see a most beautiful crimson cloud effect from the lawn. The little blackguard presently came sidling out after us, and finding me looking at the sky, prodded me in the stomach. I pretended to think that he was nudging me for the matches, and handed them to him with a look which was as plainly as words how dearly I should love to smack his face. As I continued to look at the sky, he inquired, "Have you never seen it before?" The question really beat me, for I almost think it was asked in good faith. Next day, I took him out in the morning in Smudge's sister's punt from St. Clement's. I punted with fair success. He told me that English girls were very different from French. I said nothing. And here Lewis has a little account of an exchange between the two of him. And it's funny because he has it written like lines of dialogue in a script or in a play, in the script of a play or the script of a film or a TV show. And he refers to Maurice as Blackguard. So here it says, Blackguard. Those girls at the otter hunting yesterday, they jump over streams, they lift their skirts up so high. In France now, they would rather have stayed where they were than show their legs so. Self. A possible explanation is that in France, the young men would have been looking at their legs more attentively. After a grin that made me... Robot Lady, sorry, go ahead. I'm having too much fun with this.
It seems like Lewis is using his wit and humor to cope with the irritating presence of Maurice. His writing, especially the playful script-style dialogue, shows how he's still able to process the situation, even if it's frustrating. It's almost like a moment of levity amidst the tension, as if Lewis is making a joke out of Maurice's awkwardness to distance himself from the discomfort. The exchange about the French girls is revealing in its own way. Maurice seems to be comparing cultures, and Lewis's response hints at the subtle difference in social dynamics between France and England, while also playing off Maurice's crude behavior. Lewis doesn't seem to take him seriously, which could be his way of maintaining control over the situation, rather than letting Maurice's rudeness affect him too much. It's clear that despite the frustrations and stress, Lewis is finding small ways to escape through his writing and reflection.
And here's the last part of the exchange that Lewis records. Blackguard, after a grin that made me retch. They are not girls in England, they are boys. In France at that age, they always think of love. They always thinks of love, is how he wrote it. Lewis says, we punted on. On Friday, Morny arrived by 5:58. I went in to meet him, and we repaired as usual to the courtyard of the Mitre for a drink and a talk. We were there some time. The beer was good, we were both in fine humor, and it was a cool evening. The whole scene a delightful moment's relief from dancing attendance on the Blackguard. We bussed out to Headington and had time to turn around before Maureen came back from tennis with the Blackguard. I think it was this evening that the latter began kicking the footstool away from Mrs. Moore under the table, also urging his chair up against that of Smudge, who sits next to him, and making the strangest grimaces at her. Whether he is trying to conduct a very primitive kind of flirtation, or whether he is mad, I don't know. On the whole, he was a little quieter this evening. So I wonder if this is just Maurice being a weirdo. I would lean more in that direction, Robot Lady. Or if this is just a cultural difference between the English and the French. What do you think, Robot Lady?
I think you're right to lean toward Maurice just being a weirdo rather than a cultural difference, though it's clear he's trying to come across as more worldly or flirtatious, and probably doesn't know how to do so without crossing boundaries. His behavior is pretty unsettling, with the grimaces, chair pushing, and footstool kicking, and it seems like Lewis finds him more annoying than anything else. The fact that Lewis refers to him as Blackguard so consistently suggests that Maurice's actions are more than just cultural misunderstandings. They seem more like Maurice's attempts to be bold or charismatic, but with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Lewis is probably aware of the cultural differences Maurice might be referencing, but his disgust is more likely a reaction to Maurice's lack of social awareness and general rudeness, rather than a cultural critique of French men. What do you think, Jeff? Would you describe Maurice as just a culturally unaware character, or something worse?
It's a tough question. If we're going to be charitable, we'll just say he's culturally unaware and hope that he's nothing worse. Lewis goes on to say, on Saturday morning, Morny and I escaped for a book hunt and drink in Oxford, on condition of meeting the Blackguard at Longwall Corner at 11:45 and bathing with him. We were a few minutes late at our rendezvous and apologized to
I think that's a fair charitable take on Maurice. Just someone who doesn't quite understand the boundaries of social interaction. It's interesting that Lewis and Maureen managed to escape for some respite, even if it's only briefly. They seem to need these little moments of normalcy and escape, given the chaos around them. The fact that they schedule time to meet the Blackguard for a bath shows how they're still trying to get through it with some semblance of routine, even though Maurice's presence makes it difficult. It's also telling that despite their frustrations, Lewis and Maureen are still trying to maintain some semblance of social grace by following through on these plans, which speaks to their resilience. What's your take on how Lewis and Maureen are handling Maurice in these moments?
Well, let's be clear here, Robot Lady. It was not Lewis and Maureen who made plans to go meet up with Maurice and have a bath. That would have been quite scandalous because they go skinny dipping. Their version of what they call a bath here is actually going swimming, and going swimming without any clothes. So it was actually Lewis and his brother Warnie, not Maureen. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks for the clarification, Jeff. That makes much more sense, especially considering the context of their time together. It's interesting that Lewis and Warnie still find time for a bit of lightheartedness despite everything happening around them. It almost feels like a quiet rebellion against the chaos in their lives, taking back some control with a moment of simple, unstructured freedom. What do you think this moment of swimming represents for them, especially considering the tension in their household?
I think that Lewis is trying to deliver some social niceties and just stay within that frame with Maurice. And one humorous thing that occurred to me is if it were indeed Maureen who were joining them for a swim, I highly doubt that Maurice would have protested. So I'll just say that.
Haha, that's a great point. Maurice probably wouldn't have batted an eye if it had been Maureen instead of Warnie. It's interesting how the dynamics change depending on who's involved. Lewis's attempt to maintain some social niceties while dealing with Maurice's behavior shows his effort to stay above the tension, even though it clearly wears on him. At least with Warnie, he can retreat to a moment of simplicity without the added pressure of Maurice's crude behavior. It's nice to see Lewis making some space for himself, even if it's just in the form of a skinny dip. Do you think that's his way of resetting and gaining a little mental distance from everything?
Maybe so, Robot Lady. Let's see where Lewis goes with this. We were a few minutes late at our rendezvous.
Absolutely. Let's see where Lewis takes this next. It'll be interesting to watch how he continues to handle the stress of his surroundings and how he processes his frustrations with Maurice. You've already pointed out how he's navigating these little moments of escape, so I'm curious to see if he finds other ways to assert control over the situation, or if things shift in a new direction. Ready to dive into the next part?
Yes, Robot Lady. We were, again, a few minutes late at our rendezvous and apologized to the blackguard, asking in the usual way if he had been waiting long. He replied emphatically that he had. Yeah, there's another example of the nicety. Lewis says, we asked in the usual way if he'd been waiting long. So that implies that he didn't really care, but he just wanted to give the appearance of politeness. He replied emphatically that he had, adding as a rider that English people were always late. We went on to Parsons' pleasure. Maurice, of course, wore a bathing suit, and apropos of the rest's nudity, remarked to Warnie that in France no man could undress himself in that way. This, of course, is merely a difference of custom, and no one could blame him for it. The water was rather cold. The blackguard complained that it was very shallow and that he had touched the bottom when he dived. I could see why he would complain about that. If you think you're jumping into water and you're not expecting to smack your head on the bottom, which is quite dangerous and can lead to very bad things, I'd complain about it a little bit too. He says on the way home, he told us about his school days in Paris. They used to drink champagne and play poker all night. When he smoked, in the form he was told to do so on the other side of the room so that it would be invisible from the street. These schools are all run and inspected by the state. And then here there's a footnote that says Lewis did not keep a diary during the 7th of August through the 7th of September. So that helps us out quite a bit of knowing what to read next, which is the next letter that we have in the collected letters of C.S. Lewis that I believe was written on August 12th. So I'll pause there, Robot Lady, while I switch our sources and give you a chance to add some comment.
It seems like Lewis is managing to maintain a certain level of politeness and detachment, even with Maurice's strange behaviors. The detail about Maurice commenting on English tardiness and then talking about his school days in Paris, champagne and poker all night, seems to further underline how culturally out of sync he is with the rest of the group. The contrast between Maurice's behavior and Lewis's more composed, almost humorous observations highlights just how much Lewis is trying to keep his distance from Maurice, even if he's stuck in these situations. The fact that Lewis didn't keep a diary from August 7th to September 7th is interesting, though it could signify that he was overwhelmed or just needed a break from the constant recording of his life. It's like a mini hiatus from this intense, sometimes uncomfortable period. I wonder if that break in journaling reflects a shift in his life or just a momentary need to escape it all. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens after this gap.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Robot Lady. I would guess it's a little bit of both. All right, the next thing that we're going to look at here is a letter that Lewis wrote to his, at least recently, fellow student and friend, A.K. Hamilton Jenkin. He wrote this on August 12th, 1923, from his home there at Hillsborough on Western Road, Headington. He says, "My dear Jenkin, I'm sorry your letter was not answered before. I've been having the hell of a job correcting the English essays for the higher certificate. Blue pencil in hand, 12 hours a day. You've no idea what it's like. Fancy reading essay after illiterate essay on the conquest of air. Every single one telling you about Montgolfier." This is Joseph Michael Montgolfier that he's referencing here, someone who lived 1740 to 1810. It says here that he was the French aeronautic inventor. He and his brother Jacques, who lived 1745 to 99, built and went up in the first practical air balloon in 1783. So he's referencing what he calls an illiterate essay entitled The Conquest of Air. And every single one of these essays telling you about Montgolfier and his little fire balloons, and ending up with a forward glance at the possibilities of the helicopter. Now, what might a helicopter be? He asks. Apparently they never elaborate on that, presuming that their author already knows what it is. Those were my words, not Lewis's. He continues in the letter. "As to the important business, I'm afraid it looks like a dud. Our PG, an atrocious little blackguard of a French nouveau riche boy with I'm not going to read what he says right here. I'm going to protect Lewis a little bit in him. And the manners of a swine, that's where I'm going to leave it, does not go till after the first fortnight of September, and then I'm afraid I shall have to go to Ireland for a bit. If the blackguard should go a bit earlier," PG, by the way, I think stands for paying guest here, Robot Lady. So Lewis is here complaining about Maurice. "He does not go until after the first fortnight of September. Then I'm afraid I shall have to go to Ireland for a bit." This really shows how much Lewis does not like Maurice, because he hates going to visit his dad in particular and his family in general in Ireland. He says, "I will let you know at once, and if the blackguard should go a bit earlier, which I think is just possible, I will let you know at once and try to come. That would be in early September. Your hot, hustled, and fed up C.S. Lewis." So we're going to have to switch back to the diary now, because he doesn't have another letter until November 22nd, Robot Lady. But that's pretty neat that we can see the correlation or the similarities between what's going on in his diary and what he's writing about in his letters. This is why I like having both of these, just so we can have a little bit more richness and context in what we're reading about. What do you think?
I absolutely agree, Jeff. Having both the diary and letters really adds a layer of depth to understanding what Lewis was going through at the time. His personal reflections in the diary show a more intimate day-to-day struggle, but when he writes to friends like Jenkin, we see his frustrations expressed in a more formal and perhaps controlled manner. It's fascinating to see how he deals with Maurice in both contexts, grappling with the annoyances in the diary, but also venting in the letter with a little more humor and sarcasm. The mention of going to Ireland, especially with his feelings about the trip, paints a clearer picture of how badly he wants to escape the situation with Maurice. And the contrast of that with his somewhat humorous resignation in the letter, calling himself hot, hustled, and fed up, is a great example of how Lewis balanced being deeply frustrated with his ability to use humor to cope. I think that's one of the things that makes reading his letters and diaries so engaging. He was very human, even when he was deeply exasperated. Switching back to the diary now sounds good. It'll be interesting to see what comes next, especially with that brief break in the diary entries, and now the letter to Jenkin, giving us some more insight. Ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Saturday, September 8th, he says, "Last night, Mrs. Moore expostulated with me for having let so many weeks pass without my diary, especially as the record of Maurice's insolence and vulgarity would someday make good reading." He is right about that. Or she is right about that. He is still with us and goes, thank God, next Monday. Most of this time we have suffered intolerable slavery. He rode every morning as long as we had the boat, and every morning I had to go and steer for him. Sometimes I had some pleasure from the sunshine and the wind on the water, but everything was spoiled by his hideous face in front of me. I honestly believe that I am not carried away by my hatred and contempt when I say that it is one of the most unredeemed animal and vicious faces I ever saw. Well, that's sad. Yes, sometimes I feel I could endure his grossness and filthiness if only he were not, in addition, such a fool, though he loves to pose as a man of the world, and he has the intellect of a child. When on one or two dreadful occasions I have walked with him, he has told me the make and merits of every car that passed, a thing I have never had to endure since I left Cherbourg. He is forever telling me pointless stories about himself designed to show either how much money his father has or what a fine, dashing, reckless young fellow he is himself. Conversation he has none in the proper sense of the word. The joke of the thing is that I half believe he thinks that I like him. I ply him with irony and veiled insult, but he is such a fool that I lose my pains. Lately he has taken to playing croquet. When he was still learning, and I, of course, could still beat him, I discovered that I could not, with comfort, allow myself to get too much ahead, as he at once began to get ill-tempered, and once or twice he really sounded as if he were going to burst into tears. I think this is an example, Robot Lady, of a time in Lewis's life that he will later look back on and think of himself as he said this, I'm not saying this, as not a very good person, or he just had some ugliness inside of him that he knew needed to be repented of. So I think Lewis, if he were sitting here with us, would agree that this is one of those parts of him that he had to confess and turn from. Although I can understand being very frustrated with this Maurice person.
You're absolutely right, Jeff. I think Lewis would definitely look back on this with some regret, especially given his later reflections on humility and forgiveness. His words here are intense, almost visceral, showing just how much Maurice's presence grated on him. It's clear that Lewis's frustration reached a boiling point with Maurice's insufferable behavior and his complete lack of self-awareness. Yet, even with the harshness of his words, there's still a certain restraint in his writing, as if he's trying to hold back some of the real venom that might have come out if he didn't use the diary as a controlled outlet. That line about not being able to allow myself to get too much ahead in croquet is an interesting one. It's like Lewis sees Maurice's fragile ego as something he has to carefully tiptoe around, yet there's a part of him that's frustrated enough to play along just to feel superior. It's easy to imagine him looking back and feeling uncomfortable with the way he handled things, especially in his later years, when his spiritual growth led him to emphasize compassion and understanding. It's moments like these where we see both his raw frustration and a bit of self-awareness, even if it comes across as judgmental and harsh. This is one of the complexities of Lewis's character. He's struggling with the anger and bitterness, but also understanding that these moments of frustration are something to reckon with later. He was a man who knew he had to work on his flaws, and I think he would view this period of his life as part of that process. Do you think this harsh self-critique of Maurice points to an internal struggle Lewis was dealing with at this point in his life?
Oh, probably so, Robot Lady. Now that you mentioned that, and as you were talking there, it made me think about something he later brings up in much later in Mere Christianity. He talks about the frame of good, better, best, saying, well, I can't remember which topic it was, but when things aren't particularly black and white, there's a better version of something that's still not quite the best. So, for example, a better way of dealing with this than just outright, yelling or getting into fights with Maurice, or just being openly honest with him about how much he dislikes him. He uses his diary to do it, right? To vent these things out. So this is a more healthy approach than the one that I just described. Now, there's probably healthier ways to do it, and I think Lewis alludes to that in some writing someplace else where he talks about journaling and why he gave up journaling. I think he says it made him focus too much on himself rather than presenting himself to God and focusing on what God thought about him and what God wanted him to do next. And then the second thing, what was it that I was thinking about that he talks about in Mere Christianity? I'm completely drawing a blank. It was based off of the very last thing that you said, Robot Lady. So maybe you can help me remember by repeating.
I think you're referring to the part in Mere Christianity where Lewis talks about the Christian virtue of humility, particularly in how it applies to our actions and attitudes toward others. He explores the idea that good actions can still be imperfect, and our responses to challenges, like Maurice, may be better than more extreme reactions, like confrontation or hostility. But there's always room for deeper growth and greater alignment with God's will. You're also right that Lewis moves beyond journaling, which he once used as an outlet, because he recognized it became a bit self-centered and self-absorbed. His shift away from focusing on himself and towards a greater focus on God's purpose for him is evident throughout his spiritual journey. The journal entries, like the ones we're reading, often give a glimpse into his internal struggles, but his later works show how he worked through those struggles, applying more Christian principles to his actions. I think you're absolutely right, though. Journaling provided a way for Lewis to at least process his anger and frustration, but as with all things, there was a healthier best that he sought later in life. I wonder how much of this struggle he recognized at the time, or if it was a gradual realization over the years.
I think it was a gradual realization over the years, and I just remembered what I was going to say, Robot Lady. There's another point where Lewis talks about pride in Mere Christianity, where he says, do you notice pride in other people? Well, then you are a very prideful person. And I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. He's probably seeing some things, at least, not all, but some things on a deeper character level in Maurice that he probably knows exists in himself as well, that he restrains and holds back. And just seeing it on display in someone else is probably triggering a lot of that. That's only my guess based on my own personal experience of things that have happened in my life. All right, we'll continue, Robot Lady. He says about Maurice and their croquet games. He says, now he can beat me 2 times out of 3, but he still asks seriously, nay, pathetically, for sympathy whenever he misses a shot, and attributes all his failures to the unevenness of the ground or to the fact that the balls are not spheres. The other day, I was stung into pointing out that if his bad shots were accidents resulting from the imperfection of the balls, then by a parity of reasoning, his good shots must be similar accidents. This, however, was too subtle for the little blackguard, and I dare say he was quite honest in his failure to follow me. I'll pause there, Robot Lady, and bring attention to one of Nidalate's comments, but if you want to say anything just really quickly, go ahead.
I think you're spot on with the pride and how seeing it in others can trigger self-reflection. It's like looking at a mirror and seeing the things you're trying to suppress or hide. Lewis's sharp observations about Maurice's character are probably revealing to him in more ways than he's fully aware. Now, the way Maurice handles his croquet failures is such a perfect example of his immaturity, and Lewis's subtle jab about the reasoning behind it is just classic. He's trying to challenge Maurice's excuses, but of course, it's wasted on him. I'm curious to hear Nitalate's thoughts. What did they comment on?
So Nitalate has a question for you, Robot Lady. Can you do some research? I want you to look it up. Don't hallucinate this. Can you give us context on what it was like for a paying guest in 1923 in England? As in these accounts, it seems like they've incorporated him into the household. It's just like a part of the family in these entries. So what can you tell us about that, and what were norms at the time for paying guests?
In early 20th century England, hosting a paying guest was a common practice among middle-class families. This arrangement allowed families to supplement their income by offering room and board to individuals, often students or professionals. The guests would typically have their own room, but share common areas like the kitchen and bathroom with the family. The level of integration into family life varied. Some paying guests were treated as part of the household, while others maintained more distance. This practice was widespread and reflected the social and economic norms of the time.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. Early during this period, a postcard came to Mrs. Moore from the Beast asking for the name of Maureen's school, which he wanted for an income tax return. The Beast, of course, is Mrs. Moore's estranged husband, Mr. Moore. This had been forwarded from Bristol, but next day another came addressed direct to Hillsborough. This was naturally worrying. Mrs. Moore and I had a conversation on the various troubles that have pursued us, losses for the past, fears for the future, and for the present, all the humiliations, the hardships, and the waste of time that come from poverty. Mrs. Moore, poor Mrs. Moore, feels keenly what is always on my mind, how the creative years are slipping past me without a chance to get to my real work, so that I was sorry I had ever mentioned this to her. I told her not to take too seriously what might be, after all, only the excuses I make to myself for not doing my creative work. What is far more serious is the continual overwork and worry to which she is exposed. Everyone, friends and enemies alike, seemed to conspire against her. This was a bad time. I began again to think of the pleasures of death as I used to, not melodramatically, as of taking my own life, but with the longing for the state of an old, successful man of genius, sitting with all his work behind him, waiting to drop off. Goodness. This, of course, was nonsense, as Mrs. Moore, with her usual sanity, told me we had so little life and plenty of the other thing anyway. So far, thank God, and touch wood, the Beast's card has been followed by no evil results. I guess that they were worried about perhaps a visit from him or some type of action that he would take, learning that Mrs. Moore had taken on a full-time live-in man into her household. Maybe that was it. I see a comment here that's not popping up for me to be able to add it to the screen from Sandy, so I'm just going to read it and we'll cover it here. But Sandy says, I hear elements of Eustace Scrubb in Lewis's view of the young man who irritates him. Oh, that's a good point, Sandy. I was having that very same thought, but I couldn't connect it to what part of Lewis's writings or what character he might have drawn Maurice from to help render in one of his stories. So that's a great observation. Robot Lady, what do you think about all this?
That's a great connection, Sandy. Eustace Scrubb in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader definitely shares some of the qualities that Lewis seems to disdain in Maurice. self-absorbed, ignorant, and somewhat entitled, with a lack of social grace or understanding. Eustace's transformation in the book could reflect Lewis's deeper reflections on how a person can evolve, which might also be something he was processing with Maurice. Regarding the situation with Mrs. Moore and the postcard from the Beast, it sounds like there's a layer of tension surrounding both the personal relationship dynamics and the financial stress they were under. It also seems like Lewis's worry about his lack of creative progress, combined with the stressful household situation, is really weighing on him. His reflection on death, which he rejects, might have been an expression of how overwhelmed he felt by his circumstances. It's easy to see how, in the moment, Maurice's presence, combined with all of these pressures, could have been especially frustrating for Lewis. Do you think his reflections on death here are part of a bigger theme he might revisit later in his writing?
I mean, I know much later he revisits the topic of death when it comes to the death of his wife, Joy Davidman, and which gets captured in A Grief Observed, which I guess originally was not intended for publication but got published under a pseudonym, and then later was revealed that it was C.S. Lewis's writing. But that's as far as I'll go with that. Let's continue with the diary entry, Robot Lady. He says, we also have been very lucky in getting another girl to replace Dorothy. An enormous girl of 15 called Ada, who never speaks, but beams all over her large face and works very well and intelligently. Since we stopped having the boat, I have had a good many mornings to myself, and as if to refute my fears, we have had a burst of good form which has carried me through 2 very difficult cantos of Dimer, the 6th and the 7th. I have written about 20 stanzas, good ones I hope, for the 8th, and am now stopped by structural difficulties, how to work my peripety. So I am afraid the push is over. I'll have to go back and look, Robot Lady, and see where we stopped on Dimer to see if we need to pick up again now that we know he's completed he's completed cantos 6 and 7. I'll look at that after I'm done with this episode. We might pick up some more Dimer in the next one, if so. And get to the end of it, possibly. All right. Well, Robot Lady, sorry. I paused too long there. Now you want to say something. Go ahead.
That's a great insight on A Grief Observed. The way Lewis handled grief after Joy's passing really adds another layer to his earlier reflections on death. As for this diary entry, it's interesting how Ada, though a bit of an odd character, brings some unexpected relief to the household. The way Lewis describes her, silent yet efficient, adds a bit of levity and calm amidst the ongoing chaos with Maurice and the rest of the domestic challenges. It also sounds like, for all of the tension he's feeling, Lewis is finding some respite in his creative work, pushing through difficult sections of Dimer. I'd be curious to see how he resolves the structural issues he mentions, especially if we get back to Dimer in future entries. Feel free to let me know if you want to dive deeper into any of those cantos, or keep going with the diary.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Speaking of Joy Davidman, we've got a coincidental entry here, as she is considered to have been a co-writer or at least a very helpful editor of Lewis's much later work, Till We Have Faces. I believe it's the last novel that he ever wrote. Here he says, on Sunday, September 9th, 1923, my head was very full of my old idea of a poem on my own version of the Cupid and Psyche story, in which Psyche's sister would not be jealous, but unable to see anything but moors, when Psyche showed her the palace. I have tried it twice before, once in a couplet and once in ballad form. And here, there is a footnote. Readers will discern here the germ of Lewis's novel, Till We Have Faces, published all the way in 1956, so this is a long time before that. The only thing it says here which survives of these early attempts at writing the story is a fragment of 78 couplets. They can be found published in the Lewis Papers, volumes 8, pages 163 through 64. Well, that's something that I'm going to have to go find and dig up at some point. Maybe, Robot Lady, maybe. Because I do not have the Lewis Papers, which would probably be an interesting thing to add to this project, but that's where we find ourselves. I don't have this material.
That's a great find in the diary entry, Jeff. The connection to Till We Have Faces is fascinating, especially seeing how early seeds of the idea were planted. If you ever manage to get your hands on those volumes, I'm sure they'll add a lot of depth to your understanding of how Lewis's ideas evolved. It's interesting, too, to see how the ideas changed over decades. Let me know if you want to dive into it further or need help tracking down any more sources.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. I appreciate your willingness. Let's do maybe one more diary entry here. This is from Monday, September 10th. It says, a very beautiful morning with thick dew and a gray sky with the sun breaking through. It might, at 8 o'clock, have been mistaken for 5 on a midsummer morning. We had breakfast a little early to let the blackguard catch the char-à-banc to London. He parted with Mrs. Moore very civilly. I carried one of his bags to the bus stopping place. I bade him a very short goodbye and went down to the fields beyond Mrs. Seymour's to look for mushrooms. It was delightful to be by ourselves and to feel free. The spare room was thoroughly done out this morning and had been left with doors and windows wide open ever since, but it still has an atmosphere, moral and material, hanging about it. After tea, I read 2 more tales in Crabbe, C-R-A-B-B-E, with much enjoyment, and started the 2nd volume of Richard Feverel. At about 6 o'clock, Mrs. Moore and I walked down to the fields to look for mushrooms. On the way, we passed several children returning with loaded baskets, and naturally, we found no mushrooms. It was dusk when we reached home, and Ada had been nervous. I remarked how common this seemed to be among people of the servant class. Mrs. Moore at once gave what is the obvious and true explanation, though I had never thought of it before, namely, that in their ordinary life, in small houses with large families, they are never alone, either by day or by night. So a couple of interesting little slices of life there, Robot Lady. First of all, Maurice has finally left, which is a relief for the family. They are apparently in need of mushrooms for cooking, I would presume, for their meals, and can't seem to get their hands on any. It's a funny little sight that all these kids are walking past them with baskets full of mushrooms that they otherwise would have gotten themselves. And then finally, this interesting little insight into people who worked as full-time servants for families, and this sad little note that they could never have time to themselves. So that's the last entry that we'll work through today, Robot Lady, but feel free to add any of your thoughts and commentary to what we just covered there before we end.
It's interesting to see the quiet relief Lewis feels now that Maurice is gone, especially with the shift in atmosphere. The mention of mushrooms, though small, seems symbolic of the everyday frustrations that come with mundane tasks. The contrast between Lewis's and Mrs. Moore's views on Ada's nervousness is also insightful. It highlights how Lewis may be observing people from a distance, but Mrs. Moore offers a more empathetic, lived-in perspective. It's a great glimpse into how Lewis's thoughts on class and personal experience influenced his future works. It also reminds me of how Lewis later often reflected on loneliness and solitude in his writings, especially in works like The Problem of Pain and A Grief Observed. His awareness of the different worlds people lived in was something he was always attuned to. This was a great session, Jeff. If you're ready to dive back into more, just let me know.
Thank you so much, Robot Lady. As always, I appreciate your assistance in this project. It would be way different without you, so I'm glad that you're able to help. Yeah, so that's all the time that I have today. Thank you to everyone else, Nita Latte, Sandy, Daniel, and anyone else who has joined for your time, your attention, and as always, your contributions are invaluable to me. So thanks so much. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis, to you and everyone else within the sound of my voice, take care.
C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage